For more than 40 years in this 20th century, much of mankind has been plagued, panicked, or perplexed by communism, Chinese style. To China's millions, the spreading malignancy of communism has meant a continuing plague of murder, vandalism, civil war, oppression, and now unbridled madness. To millions of mainland China's neighbors in Asia, Communist China has exported panic, the Hook Rebellion in the Philippines, genocide in Tibet, the attempted conquest of South Korea, the brief but ominous invasion of India, a nearly successful takeover in Indonesia, the bloodletting in Vietnam, and now the growing insurgency in Thailand. To those in the West caught between absorbing the Marxist-made myths of Chinese communism and the harsh realities of its internal oppression and external aggression, Red China is at least perplexing. Yet much of what the world has come to know of Communist China, its leaders, its motives, and its methods, was blueprinted in microcosm in 1929. In that year, near the city of Nan'anfu in central China, a kidnapping occurred. Held for ransom by relatively unknown bandits were two missionaries, one an American Catholic priest, the other a German Protestant minister, his wife and child. The ransom note was forwarded to the Catholic mission in the district. The note threatened death as the penalty to the kidnapped victims if $20,000 were not forthcoming within 3 days. 1927 was a different day from now, with different attitudes wherever America's citizens were involved. The U.S. consul in Canton rejected the ransom note, demanded action by local authorities, and advised the outlaws that immediate release of their prisoners unharmed was the only acceptable response, or else. Faced with such an ultimatum, the bandits beat a hasty retreat and the kidnapped victims returned to safety. In the years to come, the bandit chieftains were to become better known. Their names, Mao Zedong, and the eventual commander of the Chinese Red Army, Zhu Da. Though denied success in that early effort by a brave American consul, these outlaws employed blackmail, betrayal, and bloodshed over the next 2 decades to win control of mainland China by 1949. Since then, China's 700 million people have suffered under a tyranny not paralleled in modern history. In 17 years of Mao Zedong's communist rule, it is estimated conservatively that 16 million Chinese have been executed. Additional millions have fled into exile beyond China's borders. Untold thousands have been made political prisoners, and the balance endure bondage. Western propagandists for Mao and his followers have sought to portray communism in China since its inception as a movement of agrarian reformers idealistically evolving as the wave of the future. In the West, in Europe, and the United States, the gullible minority among sophisticates and intellectuals has parlayed such a propaganda theme to build support for the outlaw regime of Mao Zedong in the capitals of the world and in the United Nations. But during these years of tyranny, what have the Chinese themselves experienced from the agrarian reformers, from the wave of the future? Since 1949, family and community, the foundation of China's civilization through the ages, were destroyed. Communism tolerates no rival to its own organizational structure. These were the years when China's farmers, 85% of her population, were tricked and robbed of their land, deprived of the right to use the products of their own toil, and frequently forced into the industrial complexes and miseries of overcrowded cities. These were the years when Communist Chairman Mao Zedong solicited comments and criticism in a 1957 speech entitled, "Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend." As the innocents among his followers crowded forward with their criticisms, they were promptly denounced, assigned to forced labor, jailed, or executed. These were the years when Mao Zedong proudly proclaimed to the world that he welcomed war, atomic or otherwise, for China was big enough, he said, to sustain 300 million deaths and still emerge victorious. These were the years when Mao's planning produced the great leap forward, the leap which resulted in a disastrous fall backward. The leap that brought floods and starvation once more to China, forcing thousands to flee to Hong Kong, Taiwan, wherever they could go. In the most recent years, Mao Zedong, seeking to deify himself as all-knowing and all-powerful, destroyed by public purge 250,000 of his own close associates, including top leaders and especially intellectuals, to make room at the top for his successor, Lin Biao. It was Lin Biao, today's commander of the Red Army, who, in September of 1965, blueprinted the planned world revolution, likening Africa, Asia, and Latin America to the peasant masses of the Chinese countryside. These masses, Lin Biao promised, would be organized to envelop, isolate, and ultimately destroy Western Europe and North America, the citadels of alleged imperialism. It is this same Lin Biao who champions the howling mobs of teenage Red Guards to smash the old and establish the new. And it is the Red Guards who, in their turn, have pledged support for an international war of annihilation through subversion, terrorism, and rebellion. Yet, in the face of such organized madness as the world has witnessed on the mainland of China over the years, some of our foremost political intellectuals and intellectual politicians insist that whatever faults the Red Chinese regime may have, they result from our policy with respect to Communist China, not their policy with respect to all human dignity and decency, and all that is reasonable and responsible in dealing with other nations and peoples. In Congress, in newspaper advertisements, at teach-ins, and through the media of radio, television, and the motion picture, we are told in ways both blunt and subtle that Red China should no longer be excluded from the United Nations, that Free China on Taiwan no longer deserves America's support or protection, that it is up to the United States to atone for not offering Red China diplomatic recognition long ago, and for following a policy of resisting its ruthless expansionism in Asia. It is America which must sacrifice its Asian friends and allies. It is America which must abandon fundamental principles of decency, honesty, integrity in seating Communist China in the United Nations. From writer Edgar Snow to writer and movie producer Felix Green, the defenders and advocates of Peking's Red Masters have sought for a quarter of a century and more to make freedom's house, America's house, a house divided. They have ignored the horror and praised the myth to obscure the tyranny of Communist China. So it was in the fall of 1965, when Lin Biao was spelling out his plan for conquering the world, that the world's diplomats, so conditioned to rationalizing nightmares, came closer than ever before to seating Red China and ousting the free world's ally, Nationalist China, from the UN. So it was in 1966 when Red China launched its purge of intellectuals as part of its proletarian cultural revolution, that some of our intellectuals insisted it was America's containment of Communist China that was causing internal frustrations, that it was time we opened our doors to China trade and recognition, and hopefully to peace and disarmament. And while the Red China lobby distributed its propaganda, a 29-year-old member of the Chinese Communist Party, a man who was only 8 years old when Mao Zedong came to power, escaped to the West with a message. Defecting from a Red Chinese trade mission sent to Syria in July of '66, Miao Chen-pai found asylum in the U.S. Embassy and later flew to New York. Miao detailed his 10 years as a faithful adherent of communism, but newsmen who interviewed him expressed greatest interest and reportedly some amazement at the young man's insistence on taking the words and threats of China's red leaders literally, at their face value. This, said one news account, is in disagreement with the recommendations of many American experts on the Far East, most of whom have not experienced communist rule firsthand. Miao had a further observation, a warning, if you will, that the emergence of Lin Biao as successor-to-be of Mao Zedong means extremist elements in the Communist Party have prevailed over those who favored a more conciliatory line toward both the West and the so-called Soviet revisionists. Despite the inside insights given us by defectors like Miao, and those thousands of his countrymen who have made good their escape to freedom, there are still those in our own midst who insist that by making concessions to Red China, we can persuade her to adopt peaceful ways rather than belligerent ones. Not so easily convinced are a half-dozen African states which have experienced internal dissension, attempted coups, and outright subversion directed by Chinese communist diplomats ever since Peking Premier Zhou Enlai suggested Africa was ripe for revolution. Disenchanted with a wave of the future that brings kidnapping, murder, and sabotage to underdeveloped countries are such Latin American republics as Peru, Guatemala, and Colombia, which have had to wage war against Peking-inspired and financed guerrilla bands. Fortunate it is that in recent months the Chinese communists have suffered a series of reversals that could spell defeat for their world revolution plans. But, as Congressman John Ashbrook of Ohio has noted in his revealing analysis of the Red China lobby, it is our very policy of containment which the Red China lobby so vehemently opposes that has been in no small degree responsible for Red China's setbacks abroad. It is America's forthright policy of helping to block the spread of communism to South Vietnam and Thailand, which, according to President Marcos of the Philippines, has done more than anything else to give free Asian nations the opportunity and the courage to build a better life for their people and to resist the threat of communism. It is America's support for its ally, the Republic of Free China on Taiwan, which has given the governments of Thailand, Malaysia, and Japan the assurance that those who prefer freedom to tyranny in Asia have a staunch and powerful friend in the United States. And it is America's policy of maintaining a powerful deterrent force in the Pacific, in Japan, South Korea, Okinawa, Taiwan, South Vietnam, and Thailand, that today keeps Red China from spreading its cancerous rule throughout the entire Far East. As our ambassador to the United Nations, Arthur Goldberg, has stated on numerous occasions, whenever Communist China chooses to abandon the role of international gangster and becomes a responsible member of the family of peace-loving nations of the world, there will be no further opposition to seating mainland China in the United Nations. But the United States cannot be induced to submit to blackmail by Peking's masters, or to turn against our loyal ally, the Republic of China. Twice in this 20th century, the free world has fought and defeated international outlaws, totalitarian regimes which sought to conquer and subject the world to their tyrannical control. Red China is such an outlaw among nations today, led by those outlaws of the Nanan Fu kidnapping incident mentioned earlier. Can a free world that resisted a Kaiser and a Hitler, a Mussolini, and the Japanese warlords fail to halt the advance of Mao Zedong's China? To feed the hungry dragon that is Communist China today is only to whet its appetite for more. There can be no appeasement. There can be no retreat. There can be no concession until Red China abandons its outlaw behavior, that is, abandons communism. The price of liberty is still eternal vigilance. Freedom still depends on the willingness to defend it. Red China, the outlaw regime, Mao Zedong's regime, must not prevail. Whenever and wherever tyranny prevails, freedom perishes. Whenever and wherever freedom prevails, tyranny perishes. America must stand with the Chinese people against tyranny and for freedom.